Elliot hadn't slept properly in weeks. The insomnia that had plagued him for years had become worse than ever, driving him deeper into the late-night labyrinth of the internet. He was a web developer by trade, but his true passion lay in the darker, hidden corners of the web, the places most people were too afraid or too sensible to venture. It started innocuously enough. A friend in college had introduced him to the world of hacking, piquing his interest with stories of hidden forums, secret societies, and the kind of information you couldn't find on the surface web. What began as a hobby slowly became an obsession. The thrill of uncovering the unknown, the forbidden, and the dangerous became his escape from the mundane. But like any addiction, Elliot's curiosity demanded more and more. The surface web had long lost its appeal, its contents too sanitized and predictable. Even the deeper layers of the web, the places where illegal activities thrived, had become mundane. He had seen it all: drug markets, human trafficking, hitmen for hire, illegal weapons trades, and more depravity than he cared to recall. None of it fazed him anymore. Elliot was searching for something different, something beyond the usual horrors that the deep web had to offer. He wanted to find the truth behind the rumors, the myths, and the urban legends that surrounded the internet's most hidden corners. Whispers of cursed websites, digital hauntings, and entities that could reach out from beyond the screen had always intrigued him. But they remained elusive, always just out of reach. That was until one night, when he stumbled upon a thread in a hacker forum he frequented. The forum was a hub for discussions on everything from cybersecurity to illegal trades. But the thread that caught his attention was different. It was titled simply, "The Abyss." The thread was buried deep in the forum, only accessible through a series of cryptic links and redirects that made it clear whoever posted it didn't want just anyone to find it. The original post was vague, almost cryptic, but it promised an experience unlike any other, a journey into the deepest, most forbidden layers of the deep web. It was something few had dared to explore, and even fewer had returned to speak of. Most users dismissed it as a hoax, a ghost story told to scare off novices, but for Elliot, it was exactly the kind of challenge he had been searching for. The post included a single link, unmarked and untraceable, leading to a site that was supposedly the gateway to the abyss. The comments below the post were a mixture of disbelief, warnings, and morbid curiosity. Some users claimed to have clicked the link and regretted it ever since, while others dared each other to take the plunge. One comment, buried at the bottom, caught Elliot's attention. It simply read, "I went too far. If you value your sanity, don't follow me." Elliot hesitated, his finger hovering over the mouse. He had encountered plenty of disturbing content in his time, but something about this felt different. The rational part of his mind told him to leave it alone, to close the browser and forget about it. But his curiosity was too strong. He needed to know what was beyond that link. He clicked. The screen flickered, and for a moment, Elliot thought his computer had crashed. A deep, unsettling hum emanated from his speakers, growing louder until it became an unbearable static. Just as he was about to turn off the sound, the screen went black, save for a single line of red text that appeared in the center. "Welcome to the abyss. Do you wish to continue?" Elliot's heart pounded in his chest. He knew he should stop, but the lure of the unknown was too strong. He clicked yes. The screen flickered again, and a video began to play. The footage was grainy and disjointed, like an old VHS tape that had been watched too many times. The images were barely discernible at first, just a blur of shadows and distorted shapes. But as the video continued, the shapes began to take form, faces twisted and contorted in agony, their eyes hollow and black. The screen was filled with scenes of violence, horror, and death, flashing by too quickly for Elliot to fully process. Then as suddenly as it started, the video stopped, and the screen went black again. Elliot stared at the monitor, his breath coming in short, shallow gasps. He knew what he had just seen was more than just a collection of disturbing images. It felt alive, as if the very code of the website was imbued with something dark and malevolent. His mind was screaming at him to stop, to shut down his computer and walk away. But his hands moved on their own, guiding the mouse to a new link that had appeared at the bottom of the screen. It was unmarked, but something deep within him knew that this was the way forward. He clicked the link and the screen filled with a strange, pulsating pattern. It was hypnotic, drawing him in, making it hard to look away. The pattern seemed to move and shift, as if it was alive, and for a moment Elliot felt as if he was falling into the screen, being pulled into the abyss. Suddenly, the screen went black once more, and a new page loaded. It was simple, almost minimalist, just a black background with a single white text box in the center. Inside the box were 2 words, "Say something." Elliot's fingers trembled as they hovered over the keyboard. He felt an overwhelming sense of dread, as if whatever he typed would seal his fate. But he couldn't stop now. He had to see this through. He typed, "Who are you?" and hit enter. The response was immediate. "I am what you seek. I am the abyss." A cold shiver ran down Elliot's spine. He could feel something in the room with him now, something watching him. The rational part of his mind screamed that it was impossible, that it was just a trick of the mind. But the fear was real, visceral. He typed again. "What do you want?" The reply came slowly, each word appearing one by one. "To show you the truth. To show you what lies beneath." The screen flickered, and Elliot felt a presence behind him, a cold, heavy sensation that made the hairs on the back of his neck stand on end. He spun around, but there was nothing there, just the empty room, dimly lit by the glow of his monitor. When he turned back to the screen, it had changed. The text box was gone, replaced by a live video feed. The image was grainy like a surveillance camera, but he recognized the room immediately. It was his own. Elliot's heart skipped a beat as he stared at the screen. The video showed him, sitting at his computer, his back to the camera. But something was wrong. The figure on the screen wasn't mirroring his movements. It was completely still, its head tilted slightly to the side, as if listening to something. Suddenly, the figure on the screen began to move. It turned its head slowly, unnaturally, until it was staring directly into the camera, into him. Elliot's breath caught in his throat. The face on the screen was his, but it wasn't right. The eyes were black voids, endless and hollow, and the mouth was twisted into a grotesque smile that stretched too wide, as if the skin was being pulled by invisible hooks. He wanted to look away, to shut down his computer, but he was frozen, paralyzed by fear. The figure on the screen leaned closer, its face filling the monitor, until all Elliot could see were those empty, hollow eyes, and then it spoke. "I see you, Elliot. I've always seen you." The voice wasn't coming from the computer speakers. It was right behind him. Elliot's blood ran cold. Slowly, with every ounce of courage he could muster, he turned around. The room was empty, but the presence remained. It was there, just out of sight, lurking in the shadows, watching him. He could feel it, cold and malevolent, its gaze boring into him. The fear was so intense it felt like a physical weight, pressing down on his chest, making it hard to breathe. He turned back to the screen, desperate to escape whatever horror was in the room with him. But the live feed was gone, replaced by a single line of text. "Welcome to the abyss. You can never leave." Elliot's screen went black one final time and his computer shut down with a soft click, plunging the room into darkness. For a moment there was silence, broken only by the sound of Elliot's ragged breathing. Then the humming started again, low and barely audible at first, but growing louder with each passing second. It was the same static-filled sound that had accompanied the images from the website, but now it seemed to be coming from all around him, surrounding him, enveloping him in its oppressive noise. He stumbled out of his chair, desperate to escape the sound, but it was everywhere, filling the room, reverberating through his skull. It was like 1,000 voices whispering in unison, their words just out of reach, yet full of malice. He backed into a corner, his eyes darting around the room, searching for the source of the sound, but there was nothing, just the shadows, growing darker and thicker, like they were alive, creeping closer with each passing second. The humming grew louder, more distorted, until it was all he could hear, drowning out his thoughts, his heartbeat, everything. He clapped his hands over his ears, but it did nothing to block out the noise. It was inside his head now, burrowing deep into his mind, driving him to the brink of madness. And then, just as suddenly as it started, the humming stopped. Elliot blinked, disoriented by the sudden silence. The room was still dark, but the oppressive weight of the presence seemed to have lifted. He took a shaky breath, trying to calm his racing heart. Maybe it was over. Maybe it had just been a hallucination, a trick of his sleep-deprived mind. But as his eyes adjusted to the darkness, he saw something that made his blood run cold. In the corner of the room, just barely visible in the dim light, was a figure. It was tall and thin, its body obscured by shadow, but its eyes were the same hollow voids that had stared at him from the screen. The figure didn't move. It just stood there watching him, its presence radiating a cold, malevolent energy that made Elliot's skin crawl. He wanted to scream, to run, to do anything to get away from it, but he was frozen, rooted to the spot by fear. The figure took a step forward, and Elliot's breath caught in his throat. It moved slowly, deliberately, as if savoring the fear it was causing. With each step, the darkness seemed to thicken around it, until it was little more than a silhouette, a shadow within shadows. It stopped a few feet away from him, and for a moment there was silence. Then the figure raised its hand, a long, skeletal finger pointing directly at Elliot. "You've seen too much," it said, its voice a low, raspy whisper that seemed to echo in Elliot's mind. Elliot's vision blurred as his mind struggled to comprehend what was happening. This couldn't be real. It had to be a nightmare, a hallucination brought on by lack of sleep. But the fear, the cold, the presence, it all felt too real, too tangible to be just a figment of his imagination. The figure took another step forward, its hand still outstretched, its finger still pointing at him. The darkness around it seemed to pulse and writhe like it was alive, feeding off his fear. "You wanted to see the truth," the figure whispered, its voice dripping with malice. "Now you will see." And with that, the darkness surged forward, engulfing him. Elliot's world became a blur of shadows and whispers. He was no longer in his apartment, no longer in the safety of his familiar surroundings. He was falling, tumbling through a void that had no beginning and no end, a black abyss that swallowed him whole. The darkness pressed in on him, suffocating him, its cold fingers wrapping around his throat, squeezing the life out of him. He tried to scream, but no sound escaped his lips. He was drowning in the abyss, his mind unraveling with each passing second. Visions flashed before his eyes, horrific, twisted scenes that made no sense, yet felt all too real. He saw faces, their features distorted and grotesque, their mouths open in silent screams. He saw bodies, broken and mutilated, lying in pools of blood. He saw himself staring into the void, his eyes empty and soulless, just like the figure that had haunted him. Time lost all meaning as he fell deeper and deeper into the abyss. Days, weeks, months, they all blurred together into one endless nightmare. The whispers grew louder, more insistent, filling his mind with their venomous words. "You're one of us now, Elliot. There's no escape." He tried to fight back, to claw his way out of the darkness, but it was futile. The abyss had him, and it wasn't letting go. His body felt like it was being torn apart, piece by piece, each fragment of his sanity being stripped away until there was nothing left but the darkness. He was no longer Elliot, no longer the man who had once delved into the depths of the internet in search of answers. He was a hollow shell, a vessel for the abyss. And then, just as he was about to be consumed completely, the darkness lifted. Elliot found himself lying on the cold, hard floor of his apartment. The shadows that had once filled the room were gone, replaced by the soft, pale light of dawn filtering through the window. The computer screen was dark, the air still and silent, but the presence was still there, lurking in the back of his mind, a shadow that he could never fully escape. He stumbled to his feet, his body aching, his mind foggy. The events of the night before were a blur, a nightmarish memory that felt distant yet all too real. He tried to tell himself it was over, that he had just imagined it all, but deep down he knew the truth. The abyss had shown him what lay beneath the surface, what existed in the darkest corners of the internet, and of his own mind. And he knew with a cold, sick certainty that it wasn't done with him. Days turned into weeks, and Elliot tried to return to his normal life. But the events of that night haunted him, lingering in the back of his mind like a festering wound. He could still feel the presence, always watching, always waiting. He stopped sleeping, afraid of what he might see when he closed his eyes. The whispers returned, low and insidious, gnawing at his sanity. They spoke of things he didn't understand, dark secrets and forbidden knowledge that made his skin crawl. He tried to reach out for help, but who could he turn to? Who would believe him? The abyss was not something he could explain to a therapist or a friend. It was something beyond comprehension, something that existed in a realm outside of reality. The days blended together, each one a monotonous blur of fear and paranoia. He couldn't escape the feeling of being watched, of being followed. He would catch glimpses of shadows out of the corner of his eye, hear faint whispers that seemed to come from the walls, the floor, the very air around him. And then the visions started. At first they were fleeting, brief flashes of the abyss that would appear in the corner of his vision, gone before he could fully register them. But as time passed, they grew more frequent, more vivid. He would see the twisted faces staring at him from the screen, the hollow eyes that had haunted him that night. He would see the figure, standing in the corner of his room, its hand still outstretched, still pointing at him. The line between reality and nightmare began to blur. Elliot could no longer tell what was real and what was a product of his fraying mind. The abyss was consuming him, piece by piece, pulling him deeper into its darkness. One night, as he sat alone in his apartment, staring blankly at the wall, the humming returned. It was low at first, barely audible, but it grew louder, filling the room with its oppressive noise. Elliot's heart raced as he realized what was happening. The abyss was calling him back. The computer, which had been shut off for weeks, suddenly flickered to life. The screen was black, save for a single line of red text that appeared in the center. "You cannot escape." Elliot's breath came in short, panicked gasps as he backed away from the computer. But no matter where he went, the presence followed. The humming grew louder, more distorted, until it was all he could hear, drowning out his thoughts, his heartbeat, everything. The screen flickered again, and the live feed from that night appeared. There he was, sitting at his computer, his back to the camera. But this time the figure wasn't in the room with him. It was in the screen, staring out at him, its hollow eyes filled with malice. Elliot's vision blurred as the darkness closed in around him once more. The whispers filled his mind, louder and more insistent than ever. "You belong to us now, Elliot. There is no escape." And as the darkness consumed him, Elliot knew that the abyss had won. Weeks passed and Elliot's disappearance went unnoticed. His apartment remained untouched, his computer screen still flickering with the final words of the abyss. The deep web continued to thrive, its hidden layers filled with the dark secrets of the world. The thread about the abyss was eventually buried by new discussions, new conspiracies, and new horrors. But every now and then a curious soul would stumble upon it, drawn in by the promise of something different, something beyond the usual depravity of the web. And when they clicked the link, the same message would appear on their screen: "Welcome to the abyss. Do you wish to continue?" The cycle would begin again, as the abyss reached out to claim another victim. The whispers would fill their minds, the darkness would consume them, and they too would become part of the endless void. For the abyss was always hungry, always searching for new souls to devour, and once it had you, it would never let you go. Thank you so much for watching.